Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us here tonight. My name is Andrew Berman. I'm the Executive Director of Village Preservation. I'm joined today behind me by State Senator Brad Hoylman, City Council Member Eric Botcher, State Assembly Member Deborah Glick, Community Board 2, and the Historic Districts Council. And we are here today to protest the demolition of 14 Gay Street, a building that inspired its resident, Ruth McKenney, to write the stories which became the basis for the book, play, film, and TV and radio shows My Sister Eileen, and which inspired the Leonard Bernstein Broadway show and movie, Wonderful Town. We're here today because we're outraged that a landmarked 200-year-old house, which is such a part of our cultural history, is being destroyed. We're outraged because it was preventable and because there was such a tragic failure of oversight by the city. We're outraged because there was apparently wanton disregard for the law and public safety on the part of the owner and/or those who were working for him. And we're outraged because this and other landmark 200-year-old buildings under the same ownership have been in terrible condition and the subject of complaints and violations for years, and too little was done to fix them. We're outraged because the owner, Lionel Nazarian, has a demonstrated track record of creating hazardous conditions at other properties he owns. And the city should have known to much more carefully scrutinize what was going on here. We're outraged because the city actually owned these buildings for 7 months in 2019 after a prior owner died without a will and did nothing to address these ongoing issues of their deterioration. We're outraged because this is the 10th landmarked 200-year-old house in this neighborhood that the city has ordered demolished due to what they claim are immediate dangers that they did not prevent. And we're outraged because we're seeing a pattern where more and more owners of landmark properties are learning that if they can get the city to say that a building is too damaged to maintain, often due to their own negligence or actions, they can destroy a part of our history and profit from it. This must end. Now, let me point out that this house survived for 200 years through the draft riots, through the nearby dynamiting of 6th Avenue for the construction of the 6th Avenue subway. It survived the demolition of the nearby 6th Avenue L, a deadly fire in its basement in 2003, and hurricanes and superstorms. But it couldn't survive 6 months of ownership by Mr. Nazarian and the flimsy oversight of the New York City Department of Buildings and the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. The city failed in its responsibilities here. They failed to protect public safety, they failed to protect residents, and they failed to protect New York's history and landmarks. What was once a symbol of the dream of coming to New York from anywhere and achieving anything has instead become a nightmarish symbol of greed, craven disregard for safety, and a dysfunctional New York City bureaucracy that can't do its job.
Hear, hear. Yes.
How much more of a warning did the city need? There had been violations, complaints, and dangerous conditions at this and adjacent houses under the same ownership for many months. These houses are all 2 centuries old and fragile, designated landmarks, and the new owner has a history of creating hazardous conditions and harassing tenants. Did he need to hang a giant sign on the building saying, "Warning, this building is in danger," to get the city to act? There's something very wrong when this is the 10th landmarked building like this in a neighborhood to be ordered demolished by the city in just a year. So we are here today to demand full accountability from the owner and his employees, as well as from the Department of Buildings and the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission for their failure to act.
That's right.
We demand an overhaul of the city system for monitoring the safety of fragile historic landmark properties and the strictest possible oversight of work and conditions at this owner's 6 adjoining properties on this block, all of which are of a similar age and condition. We also demand that Mr. Nazarian be required to save and catalog every single brick and every piece of material on this building and build it back exactly the way it has stood for 200 years. He and all others responsible must be punished to the fullest extent of the law, and they must not be allowed to profit from their misdeeds. If we can't protect a landmark building of this level of not just local, but national and international significance, what can the city of New York protect?
Shame on you!
This should never have happened, and this must never happen again. So I want to ask first, we have some wonderful local elected officials with us to speak, and I'm first going to ask State Senator Brad Hoylman to come up and say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew Berman. Thank you, Village Preservation. Let's hear it for all the villagers who are out this afternoon to stand up to Mr. Nazarian and his misdeeds. You know, clearly the city has been asleep at the switch, or we would not have a situation where there have been consistent complaints about this location. We would not have a situation where there is a 200-year-old landmark structure surrounded by fragile structures in this situation. We would not have the numerous violations and hazardous conditions going back years on these and adjacent structures on this historic block. It is an absolute outrage that while we stand here, the city is not doing its job to protect our history in our midst. Am I right about that?
That's right. Yes.
So I join Village Preservation in demanding that the city monitor every building under Mr. Nazarian's ownership on this block, 14 through 18 Gay Street and 16 through 20 Christopher Street, to make sure that these buildings remain for future generations of New Yorkers. That is our demand. And to the city, I say, we're paying you to do your job, so you better damn well do it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Next up, I'm going to ask City Council Member Eric Botcher to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew and Village Preservation and all the neighbors who are out here today to express our collective outrage about what is happening here. 200 years. 200 years of history. Everything Andrew talked about. 200 years this building has stood. And now, under the city's watch, it is falling. It's been allowed to deteriorate to the point where the city has ordered it demolished. How shameful is that our city government that we entrust to properly execute the laws has allowed this to happen. We are merely stewards of this historic fabric. We are only here for a relatively short amount of time, and while we are here, it is our responsibility to ensure that these historic structures survive for future generations. So shame on us, shame on the city, and shame on this owner for not fulfilling that responsibility and for being so careless and so reckless with these precious historic buildings. This is a major policy failure, and there are big problems with the current laws, because I've only been a city council member for just over 10 months, and this is one of several instances of demolition by neglect that we've encountered, where the city comes in at the point of no return for the building. And by the way, we got on the phone with DOB and Andrew last week to see, can these buildings be saved? Can these buildings be saved? They say they've got to come down. So here we are once again with our backs against the wall, given no options other than these buildings coming down. I've got a building in Hell's Kitchen where the tenants were ordered out after a fire, and the owner proceeded to let it sit there for nearly a decade until, surprise, surprise, they come along and say, the building's got to come down.
That's the game.
That's the game. So we go up to the roof. We go up to the roof of the neighboring building and look over the side, and there's no roof on the top of the building. How on earth can the city of New York allow that to happen? How are they letting it happen here in a landmark district? So I am joining all of you, I'm standing with all of you in demanding accountability for everyone who allowed this happen. I'm at the city and everyone, and the contractor and everyone else who allowed this to happen. Those are our demands. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. We're now going to hear from our longtime State Assembly member, Deborah Glick.
Let's be clear. This is about incompetence in the city. This is about real estate speculation and greed.
Yes.
And this is about allowing our history to be taken down one building at a time. It's a disgrace. It is an outrage. We are here. I want to thank all the people who came out with hardly any notice because they are saying no more. No more. We expect the city to do its job.
Yes.
We expect the Department of Buildings not to just give a violation, but to follow up on it.
That's right.
For years, there have been complaints, there have been violations issued, and no action that holds people accountable. We want accountability.
Accountability.
We want to save our history. We want to make certain that people who buy historic landmark buildings are put on notice by this city that they're going to be monitored, they're going to be watched, and they are going to have to keep these buildings in good repair because they're not going to get a demolition order. They're not going to be allowed to profit over their misdeeds. That's what's happening here. It's unacceptable. Call on the mayor and his entire team to revamp the way in which the Department of Buildings doesn't function and to make it a real steward of our built environment. It is disgusting to see this that has stood here for 200 years to fall into disrepair. Why? Because the new owner absolutely wanted to take the buildings down when he got his hands on them.
That's right.
That's exactly the plan, and that is why we're here today to say this cannot happen again.
No.
We want every bit of it preserved, and we want to see the city hold people accountable, and we will hold the city accountable for its lack of action. Thank you.
Yes, we
Thank you so much, Deborah. And we have advocates here who work on these issues citywide. I want to ask Frampton Talbert from the Historic Districts Council to come up and say a couple of words.
Hello everyone, I'm Frampton Tolbert, the Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council. You've heard so far about the tragic situation here and elsewhere in the village, but as a citywide advocate for New York's historic neighborhoods representing more than 500 community organizations, we have also seen this across the city. Earlier this year, it was announced that 451 Convent Avenue in the Hamilton Heights Sugar Hill Historic District would be demolished under emergency authorization by DOB due to long-time neglect by the owner. In mid-December of last year, the upper floors of 21 East 65th Street in the Upper East Side Historic District were demolished under an emergency order due to cracks appearing in the facade due to neighboring construction. HGC agrees that public safety is of the utmost importance, but we also believe that the Department of Buildings and the Landmarks Preservation Commission need to devote additional resources and a closer focus on making sure that the buildings that have been allowed to deteriorate and gain numerous violations over time are better preserved through monitoring and regulation. Whether additional penalties for bad actors or new legislation or an oversight hearing, we need all these things to help better preserve these places. It is key to the future of our city to make sure that this does not keep happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker is going to be Chenault Spence from Community Board 2, which covers Greenwich Village and adjacent neighborhoods. Chenault.
Thank you. The Landmarks Committee at Community Board 2 always likes to remind people that it is not only landmarks, but landmarks preservation that is our concern. We particularly at the board have two things that we do. Okay. We ensure that the complaints, observations, and even suspicions from the community about buildings that are out of order because of permits not being followed or because of situations like this is transferred to the Landmarks Commission. In our most recent request for budget for fiscal year 2023-24, we asked for substantial increase in the budget for the commission to be able to proactively see after buildings of this kind and others that are in danger of demolition and damage because of not following the instructions that were approved. We appreciate anyone coming to us with a complaint situation, anything that might be out of order about a landmark building, which is practically every building in, as far as we can see around, because we're in districts, so every building matters, not just individual ones that happen to be old. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chenault. So I hope the message has gotten across today to the City of New York. We hold you responsible for what has happened here. And I hope the message gets across to Mr. Nazarian. We also hold you responsible for this, and we are going to do everything possible to make sure that you pay the appropriate price for what has happened here. Our history and our landmarks and our homes, these are places where people lived for 200 years, are not disposable. They are not to be neglected. They are not to be destroyed just to make a quick buck. The city has to take a long, hard look at how it does this because it's not doing it right. It is not protecting our history. It is not protecting our housing. It is not protecting tenants who used to live in these buildings, in many cases, who were forced to leave. This is a time for a reckoning by the City of New York about how they handle these issues. And we hope that they will hear our voice to say, you've got to step up to the plate. You've got to do it better. This should never, ever happen again.
Should have happened now.
I want to ask everybody to make sure that you stay involved, in this fight. If you got one of the signs, on it there is a QR code. If you scan it, it will take you to our website so that you can make sure that you're on our email list. You can support our efforts. You can send letters to the city in support of this fight. We need you. This, unfortunately, was not the first time this has happened, and I don't think it's going to be the last, but we are going to be out here every single time calling our elected leaders to account, calling bad landlords to account, and saying that we will not stand for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.